Welcome everybody. My name is Eric Sung. I use pronoun he, him, and I serve as a member for the board of directors for Society for Photographic Education. We are gathering here today in Denver on unceded land of indigenous people who are here before us. Let's acknowledge that for a second. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce Cai Quirk's talk, Transcendence, Restoration. Cai is a trans and genderqueer photographer who focuses on the intersection of gender diversity throughout history, its erasure and contemporary reclamation and restoration. The talk invites you into a world where distinction of gender, time, and place become fluid and flexible. Binary ways of seeing the world will not simply disappear. We must actively replace them. And without further ado, please welcome Cai Quirk.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Since the beginning of time, people of all genders have walked the earth, greeting beings and spirits alike. These beings walk between worlds of male and female, physical and spiritual, connecting to the liminality and fluidity of the natural world. This project centers around gender, mythology, spirituality, and storytelling, and delves deeply into an ongoing exploration of ordeal and ritual and growth and renewal. This is a self-portrait project, and through the course of creating images over 5 years, I grew tremendously, but also the series is not just about me. This is a series of storytelling and exploring the ways in which gender diverse people are so natural to this world, even as so much of the laws and things right now that are going around are trying to convince everyone otherwise. Out in nature, I found a liminality and a fluidity that connected deeply to my innermost self. This was something that I was not finding in the human world. I came out as trans, I think, around 11 years ago this month, and I first presented myself as binary trans. I presented myself as male because I couldn't even see the possibility of somebody seeing my full self. Out in the trees and the dunes and the forests, I saw aspects of myself that that I was not seeing in the human world. And I began to live into more aspects of myself. I began to live into that fluidity and liminality that I could only find in the natural world. And I began to find some of that empowerment. Some of these cycles, like summer and winter and night and day, land and sea, sky and earth, some of these that we think of as binaries always have these liminal places in between, and so many of them go through cycles. I began to walk some of these paths beyond binaries, finding these places where so many aspects of nature came together. And in this one, for example, finding the ways that it felt like land, water, and sky were all coming together. I had to come to terms more with my body and myself to be willing to present this out in the world, to be willing to put myself up on walls where strangers would see me and see parts of myself, the vulnerability of what I was willing to share of my gender fluidity with the world. This image is in a water hole that is just a few hundred feet from the house that I grew up in and was part of a transformation and some of the rebirth of living into more of these aspects of myself. And this was a transformational, this image, in this water hole, my dad used to, take me by the hands when I was this tall and just dunk me in. And then here I am transforming it years later into an aspect of this restoration, creating new stories that are of empowerment around gender diversity. Many of the images include two or more of myself. Some of this was exploring these places of fluidity of, are these two different people? Are they two aspects of the same person? Are they the same person just shown in different ways at different times? And when people ask me these questions, the answer is yes. All of them. I purposely love to just in life as well, just live into some of these aspects of liminality and fluidity that are inviting people to expand beyond these distinct questions. One of the aspects that I love of myth and how some of this brings myth into the work as well is in myths, they can mean different things to different people at different times. Even the same person hearing the same myth or the same story several times may hear it in different ways throughout their lives. One of my spiritual mentors describes this as walking up a spiral staircase in a tower. And if there's a window each place, you're seeing the same scene, but from a different perspective each time and learning something new each time. And similarly, each person that comes to hearing a new story, or in this case, seeing some of these visual stories, is coming to it with their own stories that they bring to the world. And so some people may be coming from myths from a particular culture that intertwine, or there are certainly myths and stories that arise in the modern culture today. One of the things that I was being very clear to explore was how these stories and myths could be uplifting and empowering in a world that especially right now, is very degrading and demeaning of trans folks. Some of the origin of this work, when I began working on series that led into this work about 7 years ago, was coming very much from a place of fear. This was in 2016, and there was a lot of scary things that were potentially coming around limits to trans folks. And a lot of that was bottled up inside of me. I began creating images that were predecessors to this project that were cathartic in releasing the fear, but they were not yet kind of empowering and creating new images that could replace those. One of my spiritual mentors also says that nature does not like a vacuum. And when we try to release a story or an idea without having something to replace it, that our mind just kind of sucks it back in. And so part of this project is also creating new stories, myths, and legends that can be helpful in replacing some of those stories around binaries and seeing the ways that there is a genderqueer, gender fluid person interacting with the fluidity of the natural world helps begin to expand beyond these binaries. I've had many people in seeing this project speak about the ways that has impacted their own worldview of recognizing that they had previously seen genderqueer people as, directional, like going from one binary gender to the other, and through this project we're able to see the genderqueerness as something in and of itself. And when I hear things like that, it's very powerful to know that this project is having an impact. When I was in school, I went on a study abroad program to Japan with one of my teachers, James Nakagawa, and also my other teacher is in the audience here today, Elizabeth Claffey, so I'm very excited about that. And when I went to Japan and we were invited to do some research ahead of time to try to figure out what we were going to create there, I learned that there are transgender deities. And this was the first time that I had learned of something like this in any spirituality. It was very empowering to know that these pieces that I felt within myself of gender, from me being very entwined with spirituality, that this was not just me, that this was in other places as well. And I began to learn how around the world there are so many cultures that connect gender diversity with spirituality. I knew that it was not my place to adopt stories from cultures not my own, and so I began to create these new stories. I know that given how prevalent some of these stories are in cultures around the world, that it is quite likely that there were similar stories of gender transcendence and roles of beyond binary gender in my own cultures of heritage, and yet so many of those have been erased. Part of the restoration is thinking about the ways that we can bring new stories up that are connected to the ancient threads and have that be a part of the healing. In creating new stories, I had to be willing to be vulnerable, but few others were at the time. And so this is one of the images that for me really feels, the title is settled. And for me, even though I am very open and exposed and vulnerable, it feels like coming from a place of power, of I am willing and I am ready and I am empowered enough to reveal myself to the world in this way that can help grow and empower and support other folks who are gender diverse and help support folks who maybe are beginning to learn about some of these things, that there is a world much beyond binary gender. In this image, too, there are some of the examples I was talking about earlier, how different people bring different stories to an image or a written story when interacting with it. And in this, too, I've heard, I never go out to create a particular story, to create a particular myth that I've heard from someplace else, but some of them call in archetypes, and some folks have connected this one to Prometheus and Jesus and other figures. When I hear that, I take it with a grain of salt. I don't think that that's inherently me, but at the same time, again, what I hear in that is that this is working. It is connecting to these ancient stories and thus connecting to these aspects of storytelling. So I've mentioned several times the word restoryation. And I want to dig into that a little bit more. It's a word that came to me on the edge of sleep about 4 years ago, but I've also found it in other places that other people have come up with this word as well. In the word restoryation, there is the beginning re. This, like in many other words that use this renew, restore, it's something coming again, coming full circle in cycles. It acknowledges that there was once something here, that this is not, that these stories are not creating something new out of thin air, but are connecting to ancient threads, even if those threads were broken along the way. The middle part, story, is connecting to these ways that tales and myths and legends impact our worldview and the ways that we see the people and the communities around us. Stories are incredibly powerful for this, and there have been studies that there was something in Florida a few years ago where some folks, there were two groups. One went around canvassing folks, going door to door, sharing facts about trans folks and inviting people to learn a little bit more, and others went around sharing their own personal lived stories of transness. And the people who heard those stories were much more likely to then go on to support trans folks. And so this is just one element of ways that stories can be incredibly powerful, and why for me I am particularly engaging in these larger archetypal stories that go beyond just perhaps the exact daily facts of our regular lives, but tell these larger mythological and metaphorical stories. The ending ation in Restoryation implies action. When this is put on other words, restoration, I'm blanking on other words right now. But anyway, it implies action. This must be an act of restoration. It's not passive. It cannot happen by itself. The act of erasing so many stories was also very forceful and is currently being very forceful in the many laws against trans folks that are being put in place today, that there's a lot of people going around actively seeking to do that. And so so Restoryation itself, telling these new stories around gender diversity must be active to help with that healing. This was one of the images that was the most interaction between myself. And in this image, I was thinking about the ways that so many trans folks feel isolated and feel separated, especially in rural places and in a lot of these places that I was creating images were out in rural spaces. And so again, connecting to this liminality of, is this me supporting myself? Is this bringing in more trans community? How does, is this connecting to something larger than myself? For me, I experience a lot of this as spiritual as well. And I grew up as Quaker, which is a community that, and especially my community, was open to transness even if they didn't always understand it. And so I always knew that spirit loved me. But I know that that's not always true for a lot of people. And as I created this project, it was an exploration further of that, of the ways that I could feel that support, even when there wasn't always support from the communities around me, even when few people could see my true self. In going out into these natural spaces and listening for the stories that were arising, listening both for the stories that might come in words as well as the stories that might come in visuals, I experienced through spirituality this sense of compass, like a physical feeling in my chest, leading in various directions around the dunes. This was something that helped in my own life too, sensing the directions that I was being pulled to bring both this project as well as my deeper sense of self, by being willing to follow spirit and saying, I don't know where I'm going. Like, I've arrived at this place and I will follow, and I will, and sometimes in circles, sometimes, into places that seem completely odd or boring or anything, and so often would find new aspects of nature, new things to connect to in nature that then elicited new stories and new aspects of myself. I also have been starting to do some of these kinds of photos with other people as well, and this is a part of the ways that we interact with the natural world around us. I think that there's a lot of power in this being willing to listen deeper, and it's connected to so many myths throughout time have arisen from something deeper than the person that is being a channel for it. At the same time, this sense of compass is an act of collaboration. People who are connecting to something greater than themselves are also having to release a lot of social things to be able to listen. And these are some of the ways that I'm also inviting folks beyond binaries and in inviting folks beyond these exact dualistic ways of seeing the world. It's inviting a similar listening and inviting folks to play with these aspects of listening as well. The images are each as if they are drawn from the middle of a myth or a story, and the titles are each as if they're drawn from the middle of a myth or a story. They're all lowercase, all a word or a phrase, and inviting people to imagine what the larger story may be. In the whole project, the only artificial object that shows up several times, or at all, but is this white cloth that shows up several times. And part of that is thinking about how myths are so often timeless. They can connect to people in different cultures and different times. The story of the tortoise and the hare, that has been, I don't know how long that's been around, but it's been around a while, and it means different things to different people. There are no other connections to a particular time or a particular moment, particular location, and it opens it up to these wider range of possibilities of storytelling. And the white cloth being the only artificial object, it also brought us this glowing quality and interactions with twilight, the lighting and ways that these interact felt to me also like they were eliciting more aspects of storytelling and this etherealness that feels like it's bringing into these kind of mythic and spiritual realms. A lot of the images in the series connect to aspects of twilight, and I was talking about earlier times that are between things that we may see as binaries. But night and day are only, night and day, yes, though one is light and one is dark, it's a continuum that is continuously changing and continuously flowing. I also, last year, had an artist residency and created a new series titled Beyond Pink and Blue. And in that, one of the poems that was a part of that looked at how there's the blue of the sky, the light blue of the sky in daytime and the dark blue of the sky in nighttime, and yet between these, at twilight, there's a whole range of colors. The sky turns all kinds of colors. And so this liminality and this beyond binaries, it's not just one line in between. It's not going from light blue to medium blue to dark blue, but this whole range of expansiveness. And so these times of twilight were really times that, again, connected to some of that liminality and feeling like it really connected to the gender queerness. A lot of other stories also, in various mythologies connect to animals. And so there are several. The first image in this series that had an animal in it was completely a surprise. I did not know there was a deer very close behind me, and so I joked that I was scared by a buck while buck naked. But this one was very intentional and slightly scary to come up to a bird this big, but being able to set the timer and run up and jump in the water and bring that. And in these, many of these I viewed as these ways of ordeals and rituals and in the ways that it was connecting to nature. And so particularly the ones that included animals felt very powerful in the creation themselves, because it is this fleeting moment with another being that is and being seen, not just the feeling of being seen by the trees and the dunes and these other fluid aspects of nature, but really being seen by another being that sees in ways similar enough to how humans see. Some of these aspects of ritual were very connected to the land that was there, and all of I mentioned earlier this sense of going out with as if being led by a compass. A part of that too is that most of the images, I don't go out ahead of time with a particular idea in mind of I'm going to go do this. Sometimes I might say, okay, I want to put my flash underwater, so I'm going to put it in 7 plastic bags and a plastic container and hope that it's okay. But then what emerges from there is very much in connection and collaboration with the nature. And so in this image, there was I found this circle out in the dunes, a circle of grass, and and just felt the rightness of going and sitting many times around this circle. And this is one of the few that I had help with. Most of them I take completely by myself, but this one, somebody was up on a dune, and it was actually during a workshop with Jess Dugan, so it was in collaboration with other folks there, and that was very wonderful to kind of be seen in the aspect of the creation as well. I've been asked about if some of them are performance art, and this is where it feels more towards the aspect of ritual and letting that ritual flow through into the image than exactly performance art, but I'm exploring the possibilities of ways that in the future videos may be included with exhibitions, but likely in ones that are different from the images themselves, or that are their own standalone pieces. A lot of them also, I spoke about ordeals, and in following spirit, in being willing to go further than I thought myself that I could go. I also learned just how far I was willing to go to follow spirit and be outside naked in 28-degree weather for an hour that was windy. I didn't think that I could possibly do that, and yet it was following spirit to try to do that. Some of these images, and this one was this was up that dune from the circle image, and when I went there a year later, I had been connecting to the place through editing the image for the whole last year, and I got there and it felt like just this such sacred space because I had been connecting through that place to spirituality through that time. And in a moment, I'll come to the last image. It's the earliest image in the series. There's this one too, where I chased birds for 4 hours. So and then took a nap. This is one that I was most excited by the outcome, because I had once I saw the flock of birds flying, I had an idea for it. And I knew what I wanted to do, and I had to, run around, set up the tripod, go around the whole dune while they're sitting on the ground trying to eat their berries and get ready for migration, and then pop up out of a bush. And I wish I had saved more of the blooper images because they were great, but this was one that again felt very especially connected to mythic stories because of that interaction with the animals and the ways that they're flying. They were mostly in front of my body, but in that just so powerful of this swirling all around. And this is the image that this is the earliest image that remains in the series and was a turning point towards these areas of mythology and empowerment, feeling these connections to spirituality and storytelling, empowerment, and a depth that I was not finding in the world around me. And this image was, I just recently figured out, was created 5 years, 1 month, and 5 days ago. So it's very fulfilling that this book is finally about to be coming out, and I'd invite folks to check out the book. One more quick thing. In 2023, there have been 465 anti-trans bills that have been introduced into legislature in 44 states around the country. When I started this project and then things began to get better, I didn't think that they could get so much worse. I would just invite folks to check out translegislation.com and hrc.org just to look at that and be a part of this change. I've gotten grants to donate 300 copies of the book to LGBTQ libraries around the country and aim to be doing talks with a lot of them as well. And so trying to be a part of the change, and I wish that I didn't have to do a call to action, and this is a scary time that we're living in, and I invite folks to be a part of the change as well. And my info is on that slide as well, so if you want to take a picture and then look it all up later, you're welcome to. Yeah, thank you. In a 2016 poll of over 27,000 trans folks in the US, 56% identified as spiritual, but well under half identified as religious. And I see this as so many religions are not supportive of trans folks, and yet so many trans folks connect to these ways that, I feel like it's connected to so many of these ways that throughout time there have been so many communities around the world where being trans is very connected to spirituality. And there's some stories in some of those communities of like, if spirit made you this way, like spirit's particularly like invested in like the ways that you're bringing these gifts into the world and the ways that, of being a part of the community and nourishing that. And so that was very empowering to me, and then to want to bring that to other folks as well. As I was considering the level to which that I would explore spirituality visually, as well as then in the writings of the the writings in the book, it was a consideration of the level to which some folks have been kind of pushed out by many religions, but also the ways that many folks are feeling that loss, feeling that want to connect to something greater than ourselves and be empowered and be supported by something, like know that spirit is there, spirit loves us no matter who we are, and or loves us especially because of who we are. And so bringing that element in a way that doesn't tie to any particular religion, but is still connected to that greater sense of self, which, similar to myths are also like connected to this kind of this greater knowing, this greater understanding, something well beyond ourselves. All of the scenes happened, and when there are multiple people, then yes, then there is digital layering, but they all happened in the places that they are, and that's important to me. When I heard about some of the AI stuff coming out, I was like, wow, I could have just told a program and then they do it for me. but that it is ordeal and ritual, that it is this thing to live through and thus be more empowered is really important to me, and that's in creating some future series, some future work with other people as well. That's a part of what I'm thinking about as well. Is that now? It's not to say that there's not balancing of color and things like that. There's plenty of behind the scenes work, but all of the scenes happened. Looking at some of those images, I'm like, wow, that looks like a bad idea. I don't know if I do that again, but but I'm glad I did it for this image. When I go out, it is, and this actually connects to the spirituality question too, like how it connects to my practice. But it is very much, I'm attempting to be centered within myself and not, and centered to the experiences and being in the moment. So I'm not going out to create a particular story or connect to a particular archetype, but instead creating just what is there in the collaboration between myself and nature and spirit at the time. Sometimes then stories emerge later, and that's where the stories in the book emerged out of that, of in response to some of those images and seeing some of those places of rebirth and growth and transformation and renewal, but also beyond. I think a lot of times transness is connected to the transformation itself and not the existence beyond the transformation, and so that was a part of the stories as well. So thinking about these ways that all of these aspects and metaphors intertwine, but a lot of that arises after the image is created, and when creating the image, it is very, just very much a collaboration between myself and nature and spirit. There's 6 myths in the book, and all of them were written afterwards. And I also was then learning more things about the image, learning more things about like some of the deeper meanings behind it as I was doing the writing and as more flowed through me. So thank you. I think that's, we're coming to the close of our time, but I'd invite folks to see books, see prints, come ask more questions, and I'll have an email sign-up list if you want to hear about future projects or future talks or when prints come out for this. So thank you.